Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. It's a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today's special guest is Frank Piet. Frank has quite an interesting story along the EOS life. He is a fractional integrator. He has 8 siblings. He lives currently in South Carolina. What a story. Can't wait to dive in. Frank, thanks for coming. How are you doing today?
And thanks for having me. This is a great experience. I'm looking forward to this.
So before we look forward, let's look back. Can you tell me what it was like starting to work? What do you remember your first job, and what were you like as a kid? Were you entrepreneurial? How were you?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? I did this study the other day. I listed all of the job titles that I've had, and I've exceeded 35 job titles now in my professional career. But I'll say that began when I was 11 years old. So it's you 8 brothers and sisters. Your dad, retires from the Air Force. His pension is $326 a month. There's not a whole lot of money to be had. So basically, the whole family worked. We ran paper routes. For those of you old enough to remember what a paper route was, your paper was delivered to your door, knocked on your door every night at 8 o'clock and yelled collect, and you ran and didn't pay your bill. My first actual experience was delivering newspapers and cleaning an Irish pub when I was 11 years old.
Cleaning an Irish pub?
Yeah.
Where did you grow up? Where was this?
That would have been Davenport, Iowa, the Quad Cities.
Okay.
Yeah. So my father retired from Mather Air Force Base in Sacramento, and we immediately moved to the Midwest because we had relatives there. But I'll tell you that 11-year-old boys should not be cleaning Irish pubs. There's way too much to be learned at an early age there, and I can't unsee it. But no, it opened my eyes that hard work is rewarding, and that set the stage pretty much for the rest of my life. And before I got into what I call my professional career, I was a roofer. I worked construction for 3.5 years in Sacramento. I was a roofer and a framer, and I wanted to be outdoors. I wanted to work to get into construction management. That was my goal. And then was cutting in a jack one day, and I went to stand up, and my legs were numb. And so found out that I had a herniated disc in between my L5 and my sacrum, and a massive bulge between L4 and L5. So workers' comp doesn't let you return to your job when you have an injury like that. So I was absolutely blessed with some intense rehabilitation, which I got the basically technical equivalent of an associate's degree in accounting. And I went from, so this is going to sound laughable in today's wages, but I went from making $23.15 an hour as a roofer to $5.64 an hour as an accountant. And I had a $400 a month car payment, but we won't talk about that. But it had to decide that, hey, outdoors is not going to happen, construction is not going to happen. So how do I leverage what I've got and do all I can with it, right? So I took to accounting for whatever reason, and was able to move through, accounting manager to controller to finance manager to manager financial planning and analysis to director of business planning in new markets, all in basically a matter of 9 years. So I guess the tale there is take every chance you got and, maximize it. But I think where we're going and where I see this going for me is back then I was a one-man band. Basically, I had the mindset of I can do it better than you can, and you need to just get out of my way, or I'm going to get you out of my way. And that realization came in 2004 when I was a director at a software company, and I wanted to go for this vice president role.
Were you moving all across the country, or because they said you jumped from Davenport, which I have family, if you'd heard of the sprawling metropolis of Applington, Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so my grandfather's from there. He had 27 years in the Air Force, so I kind of understand the culture. Spent a summer out there, Cedar Falls area. So loved Midwest, and I learned a lot about what it's like, the work ethic that they possess.
Yep.
It's pretty unmatched.
It's a different world for sure. Yeah.
Different world, wonderful world. I love it. So then you were in Sacramento, and then were you, of the 35 job titles, we just named a bunch that was climbing the finance ladder, right, in rapid succession. Were you moving all over, or was it the same company?
So my first 8 years in finance and accounting were with 2 substantial land development firms in Sacramento, 2 fantastic companies, both very, very, very successful. One of them was on the Forbes 500 for a long time. And then the second company I worked for was actually a construction subsidiary of Panetone Development, which is now an international development company. And just given a great opportunity to go in and be a controller there. But it was so much more than that. It was really got me outside a little bit. I would do job site visits and inspections, etc. But that was all in Sacramento. And then I realized that accounting at the time sort of had a compensation limit, and I wanted to make more money. And I knew that finance, basically, instead of recording and reporting, basically analyzing and making actionable items out of data, paid more money. So I jumped from construction finance into software finance and found that really suited my personality. So that was still in the Sacramento, El Dorado Hills area. And then in 2004, we decided to, I said I had two daughters at the time, a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. And Sacramento was just getting too expensive to raise kids in, literally paying almost $3,000 a month in daycare for before and after. And then so had an infant, obviously 2-year-old. And then because my wife and I both worked for the same software company, we'd have to do before school and after school care for our oldest daughter, right? So we're like, what can we do? And well, we had an office in Charlotte, and I negotiated moving my family to Charlotte, keeping my same compensation package as I had in California, and letting my wife retire. And, our joke was there is that, let's invest in our daughters now instead of in therapy in 10 years. Right? So we moved to Charlotte, and then I left finance at that point and actually went into business consulting, right? So, but one of the reasons I left, the story I was getting at, is that I wanted to go for this vice president's job, and I went to my boss at the time, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he started laughing at me, and I'm like, what's this about? And he's like, well, write a resume right now with anything you've done through somebody else. So I dare you.
Right? Yeah. I get it.
I didn't. I had nothing. I managed an FP&A team, but I still did most of the analysis myself, right? Had great people working for me. Missed the opportunity to invest in growing people, right? So basically said, you can't be a VP at this company unless you don't do original work anymore. Basically, you've got to be able to work through others. And right now, you will fail at that. So it was really quite a wake-up call to me, because my career was limited because I was a jerk, basically. And so I set my sights on, within 10 years, I'm going to be the COO of a software company. And in order to get there, I have to leave my personal accomplishments and my personal abilities behind and start investing in others and work through them. And that was a process. It was a long process because I wasn't very good at it. Right?
It's not easy.
No, not at all. Not at all. But ironically, when we start talking and getting to the concept of EOS, I mean, as an integrator, as an operating officer of a company, it's the same thing, right? You've got to know who's underneath you. You got to know their skill sets. You got to know what drives them, or, motivation. So it all sort of set the stage for me to mature, grow through business, grow through my faith, and become now somebody who actually cares about people, somebody who wants to know what people's hopes and dreams are so that you can help them attain that, right? And make the office, whether remote or physical office, a place where they want to be and a place where they can be successful. And again, dovetails right into what EOS creates as a work environment for people and companies to actually get stuff done and be successful.
I was reading a book recently. I want to say the title is Coaching Conversations. It's over there on my shelf. And the prologue, or the beginning, tells the story of a salesperson that was the top producer, gets promoted to sales leader, wins an award for excellence, President's Club at some major conference. And I want to say it was set out in Sacramento or San Francisco area. And then he says to everyone that works underneath him, hey, come out to this bar afterwards. We're going to celebrate. It's on me. And no one shows up. And the wizened old person that was the pool shark, who had plenty of years under his belt, but the adoration and respect of everyone attending this dive bar, everyone knew his name, calls him out and he goes, you know why nobody showed up? Is because you think this is about you. Think it's not, and you don't realize it's all about them. That story is not just for salespeople, it's for any role in an organization. It's like the higher up you go, you're more judged on how you elevate others versus how you can elevate yourself. There's a parable I want to say, to those who exalt themselves, you'll be humbled. Mm-hmm. And for those that humble themselves, you'll then be exalted.
Be exalted, absolutely.
I might have butchered the phrasing of that, but I think the principle applies. Yep. And it's good that I had a similar experience where I was told by board members that, hey, maybe you shouldn't take your ego into the boardroom. Yeah, was said that to me. It's like, hey, like there's 60 people in the organization. You know, your job is to make all 60 of them as successful as possible or find the best people. And that lesson stung at the time, but was a very well learned lesson. Going from construction, land development to software, that's a wild jump. What are some of the things that were different in the cultural organizations when you got to software versus like construction and land development?
Yeah, it's a great question. The progression was kind of ironic. I'm a at the time a technology noodler. I couldn't leave stuff alone, and back when you actually had physical networks that were token ring and things that needed terminator endpoints, it's bizarre when you think about what a physical network looked like now, what it looked like then. We had a Novell network at this office I worked in. I kept on blowing it up. I would delete volumes. I'd have storage issues, blah 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 blah. So I would take the entire 8 huge, I mean, literally, it's like Encyclopedia Britannica. I would take it home and read it every night so I could come back to the office early and fix things before anybody came in so I didn't get fired. Right. So I taught myself to be a technician because I kept on breaking crap. Right. So I had a bit of a technology bent to me. And then just through jobs, I was the IT guy. I was ordering all the laptops. I was configuring, deploying them, et cetera. So moving into like software was almost natural for me. But yeah, in this will offend a lot of people because it's not exactly accurate, but I called it moving from the industry of where people do things to where they still do things, but they just do them while sitting in a chair. And so, I mean, in construction, everybody's moving. It's rarely, even the accounts payable clerk, right, where you're dealing with subcontractors, right? You're always on the phone. You're always getting certs, et cetera, blah, 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 so you can pay bills. You're always moving, right? And so moving from people that often didn't have a degree, often just were hard workers, into an office where I was the only person in my finance department that did not have a master's degree. Wow. And I didn't have a real degree. And I told you I had the equivalent of a technical accounting degree. That was probably the biggest change, but fantastic people that I was still blessed to work with that motivated me to go and actually get my IT degree while I was there. But yeah, the whole management philosophy is different. And admittedly, there was, a few people that had, I have an MBA. I have this entitlement perspective where I've arrived, deliver it to me. I don't really have to work that hard because I'm smart, and they were smart. Don't get me wrong, but that to me was the biggest adaptation that I had to make from, just daily conversations with people. Is I know I didn't go to Stanford. I didn't go to Berkeley, and this is Sacramento, so yeah, quite a few of them did, but at the end of the day, it's the further you move past all that, you realize that you're alike, and that you still want to get success, and you find a way to work together. And then again, because I was the world's biggest jerk at the time, I was their boss within a year and a half, which didn't sit well.
There's something to be said, in not every case, but I've seen it happen as a pattern, where the feathers in your cap, like an MBA, for example, they may weigh much more than a feather and be actually what could be like an accelerant in an early stage and a constraint in a later stage. Where if you have this idea where you've arrived and you're the smartest person in the room, and you maybe are less willing to learn from people that you don't deem as successful or as qualified from you. I've seen it sometimes when people get stuck, and the point of education is to continually liberate yourself to then move on and progress. So not to knock MBAs out there, but I had a conversation in my 20s that was along the lines that you really should go back to night school and get your MBA. It only cost you $100,000 more of debt and all of your free time. And we know that school was something that you excelled at if and only if you found professors and courses that were interesting, which, by the way, what I went to school for has nothing to do with what I do right now. There's no practical application. And I was just like, thank goodness that at the time, the president of the company I was on the leadership team of had the foresight to get an EOS implementer. Because I thought that EOS journey of reading the books, doing the assignments, going up to the quarterlies on top of my day job was like in my mind the equivalent of MBA. And I like that frame because I just, more instill habits and perspectives and a set of tools versus like I have arrived. And question for you following up on EOS, I know we're going to talk about that, is at what point in your journey did you discover EOS and where were you at in your career when that happened?
Yeah, it all kind of came together at the same time of becoming or understanding what a true servant leader was, understanding that people are your greatest asset, across the board. And then being in an organization leading it, I was the chief operating officer at a software company and having difficulty getting traction. Not to throw out a bone to EOS because it's all about traction, but just getting frustrated that I couldn't get everybody on the same page. The meetings were not very productive. Every meeting was the same, a whole lot of talk about what's going wrong with no talk about how to fix it, right? There was never, all the great action plans were forgotten half hour after the meeting, right? So that frustration sort of made me reach out and know there was a better way, knowing that I was currently incapable with my skill set of fixing it myself without something else to provide a framework for me. And as we were talking before, I first thought scaling up was a way for me to go, which is Vern Harnish, absolutely fantastic program, but much more for larger organizations. And I tried to implement it, right? But it was so involved without everybody else being on board yet, I was having to do it all myself while I was trying to run the company, traveling 3 weeks out of every month. And so I had to back away and find something different. So towards the end of my 6.5 years there, so like year 5, I stumbled onto EOS and sort of secretly, which is probably heresy for an EOS implementation. The owner, Greg Phillips, great friend of mine, still just a fantastic, godly man. I implemented it without him even really knowing it. But he was a true visionary. I mean, just in he was the company sales guy. He was the company software architect. Everything about him was visionary, and the whole company was having the challenge that every great visionary company has, is they were following 20 concepts or ideas at any given time. All right. So going through that and knowing that my true role at that point was actually an integrator, and then being the filter between his ideas and the actions that the company took, right? That allowed us to finally put a bow on this company, and we doubled in size, tripled net income, and had a search fund fall in love with what we did, to sign a huge contract with McKesson Technology at the time to be their point of sale provider for their 4,500 health marts and their 101 hospital systems. I mean, it was just life changing for the organization. But without the structure and without the ability to get stuff done, we would have never gotten there. Right? Had great people, had really talented people, but I was failing in leading them without something more than just my wherewithal to get it done.
One thing that you just mentioned I need to point out is, once you were introduced to EOS and you read traction, there were probably some vocabulary terms that you could apply to life. To such or integrator and visionary.
Yep.
I think that for people, whether they're familiar with EOS or they are, but maybe there's some reflection that needs to be done, the relationship between visionary and integrator, which typically boils down to, those that are not familiar with the EOS framework, is like CEO and COO, or president and like vice president, whatever the other nomenclature is. But I like the accountability chart, visionary, integrator. If you have two people that are both integrators or both visionaries, it's like a polarity with magnets. Like it's a repel. Like you can't replicate.
Yeah.
You can't have two. There must be some counterbalance and balance. And one of the things that was interesting is you said that this person was like a tried and true visionary. So my question for you is, when you became aware of this, like how did the self-awareness process go with, you having the new identity of integrator? And were you always an integrator? Is this something that was just like natural, like the light bulb clicked off, or is this like a learned pattern of behavior?
Yeah, that's a great question. And ironically or fortunately, I owned my own technology business for 5 years before I worked at this company, right? And so had, I think, pretty decent success in corporate America, got tired of the large, slow-moving, bureaucratic corporation and got in a small business. But I was very successful in corporate America, and I realized it was because I was always delivering to standards that people put on me, and I wanted to exceed those. I wanted to impress, right? That's my personality, right? And I didn't know that. I always wanted to be Jack Welch. I always wanted to be the guy at the top. I wanted to run it all, right? And so I bought my own company, right? So I did small business consulting for 3 years, and I'm looking at these business owners because I'm still arrogant, and I'm like, man, these guys they're not that smart, and they're being, immensely successful. I'm so smart that I can get in here, and I guarantee I can be more successful than they can. Right? 5 years of some of the biggest struggles I've ever had. But what I realize is without that working for me, without working towards and for somebody else's success and support, it's hard to say out loud, but my motivation wasn't the same. It just wasn't, right? I was making enough. I was taking care of my family. Don't get me wrong. Small business is hard. I have immense respect for small business owners that can grow their business to 1, 5, 10, 15 million, because it's really difficult to do. But I realized that the same motivation for success wasn't there for me. So I realized before I got in this role that I wanted to be the number two. I thrive in the number two role. It's taking somebody else's ideas and run and help them implement and be successful, right? And why? Because I'm delivering to, now two higher powers, Lord, of course, and now this business owner that's given his flesh and blood into making this thing work, right? So I found it was a greater motivator for me.
Right? What came first, your spiritual revival or your Christian path, or EOS?
My return to the faith came first, but as you know, that first step of the act of getting baptized again or whatever, that's really just the first step in a journey that's about 1,000 miles long. So I think as I grew in faith and I got more disciplined, and Greg Phillips, again, who is just still a dear friend of mine, he challenged me to read the Bible every day, which I had never done before, and that was in 2015. And to this day, still, I follow a plan that gets me cover to cover every year. So I'm on my
every year.
Yep. So I'm on my 10th trip through the Bible this year. So
I kind of want to unpack that a little bit.
I'm in 1 Samuel. So it's basically an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Psalm, and a Proverb. So this morning was 1 Samuel 8, John 8, Psalms and Proverbs, right?
Okay, so you don't read it line by line, page by page. You do, okay.
Yeah.
Because that is like, to read it cover to cover is like a goal that I have. I went through and I'm a high fact finder in Colby. So I identified which version do I really want the most. I land on the Geneva, and I'm like, this thing is immense, right? It's huge.
Yeah.
But I didn't get all that far before I said, this is not a sustainable pattern, just to read every line page by page.
Yeah. So this year, the first 9 times through, I did NIV, and the church I go to here, the church I went to in Fort Worth, Jamie Miller's the leader of Antioch Fort Worth. And he mentioned that he was actually new and had many interactions with the gentleman who did the Message Bible. And I'd never heard of the Message Bible before. I'm like, well, maybe let me give that a chance this time as I go through it and get a different interpretation of things, right? Because it's just I'm dense, and there's so many things I miss and I blow over when I read the Bible. Even
you're not alone.
10 times through, it's just like I still finding stuff that, did I read this last time? Did I? Anyway, but go back to the question. It was that. So starting reading every day and actually getting serious about my faith, which I think you mentioned that you'd gone through that same process, and then trying to walk it out every single day, right? It's one thing to say it and talk about it, but now go out to the sports bar with your buddies on a Friday night, and is the faith really there? Are you really being the person that you say you're going to be, right? So that whole evolution, ironically, got substantial traction at the same time I started looking at business process and how to implement that. And so you combine, at the time for me, my new faith with EOS, with being a servant leader, and that sort of trifecta came together to allow me to at the end of the day, just be a better leader, just be a better, more effective, a more caring individual, right? And when I say servant leader, we implemented software at the largest hospital systems in the world, not just the U.S. I've had the fantastic opportunity to go to Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi and implement the partnership between the Cleveland Clinic and the emirate, and it was awesome. But you're on site in a large hospital system. I'd take half the company sometimes to implement the software. I'd have 20, 25 people on site, and they would introduce me as president of the company. I'm like, no, stop right there. This is an implementation process. I am simply a team member right now. And you'd have administrators and executives that were watching us do our job, and I'm getting people coffee. I'm bringing them lunch. I'm getting their 5 hour energy if they're crawling a little bit, whatever it took. And people don't understand servant leadership. They almost think that you appear weak when you do that, and I accept that, right? Because supporting the team is my best role to help them be successful. Yeah, when we get back to the office, I've got to put plans and processes in place. Yes, I do. But now I'm in their world, and I want them to be successful. So yes, I drove them around. I would get the rental car. We'd have pharmacies all over, Detroit or Dallas, and I would bring snacks and drinks and food. I've just basically run all day long doing nothing but serving my people who are out. And the satisfaction, the fulfillment from doing that was tremendous.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of self-awareness too, because I mean, if you look at, I mean, you're familiar with, well, how did Jesus lead, right? Mm-hmm. He was a carpenter. He would wash people's feet. Like, I don't know what more examples of servant leadership you need than that. I'm sure you have plenty more of examples that you could draw from.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find true when it comes to, abiding by EOS, and also what I think of as servant leadership, is the theory of constraints, where your job is not necessarily to tell people what to do. Your job is to facilitate the growth of the organization and what that means to the people within it, mm-hmm. by eliminating constraints. So the theory of constraints.
Yep.
So it seems like around a similar time period, one of your own constraints in your personal development may have been a approach of, I will outwork everyone, do it myself, become highly competent, mm-hmm. and have accolades personally. And then through a mixture of return to faith and through EOS, you started to just remove the constraints of others. And I think that is a tremendous turning of the corner for personal and professional at the same time growth. Yeah. It's funny how when you have an integrated life, like when one thing gets better, the other also improves.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. But fulfilling. And again, I think it all sort of came to fruition at the same time. One supported the other. So it was great, right? Because I think maybe without that, servant leadership wouldn't have been as easy, or, growing in my faith wouldn't have been as easy as well. Right. So it just, it was going by Ecclesiastes, it was a season for it, and that was the perfect season for it, and it worked well.
So servant leadership being near the top of your business philosophy, what lessons have you learned from the output? Like the input is service leadership, but what are some of the changes you've seen that have drastically occurred due to this, other than just like intrinsic reward of, doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's again, if there's something we're called to do, it's to embody what we believe and act it out in what we do, right? So even I would enjoy, obviously in healthcare, you've got HIMSS, the largest healthcare conference in the world, and it's either in Orlando at the time or Las Vegas. There's only 2 places big enough to hold it. I mean, it was huge if you've never been to a HIMSS conference. And I was fortunate to always have either HP or McKesson to pay my way, because it's a very expensive conference as well, too. But, it just to go and to work side by side with huge groups of people, like, the HP technical team and their demonstrators, and then working with them to speak in their auditorium at HIMSS, which I did, 2 years in a row. But it was, some people thought this might have been showy. I have a really nice black leather bound NIV Bible that a good brother gave to me back in 2007. And especially when I was in Vegas, I would go down to get my coffee in the morning in, a place where most of the people I was looking at were either hadn't gone to bed yet, right? They were gambled all night, or they got up and their head was pounding because they had a little too much fun the night before. But I made it a point to make sure that I was doing my daily Bible reading in a cafe in Vegas, not to show I'm better than you or this is so much better than you're doing, but just to always present that as an alternative or at least an option for what people were doing, right? So
more like lead by example.
Absolutely. And embodying
right?
it, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Embodying it.
Trying to walk the walk and talk the talk, not just one or the other. And I love that. And since that time, every office I've been in, I always keep that Bible on my desk. And it's not to, I've had all the theories. It's, it makes people feel uncomfortable. You shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. But bottom line, if you're truly a follower of Christ, you shouldn't be doing anything to make people feel uncomfortable. Right? It's yes, you have opinions, and yes, you have political leanings, etc., which is great from a policy perspective. But when it comes to dealing with people, it's my wife and I have a discussion. I don't care what your lean is. If I walk out and you're having a heart attack or you're getting mugged on the street, I'm not going to stop and ask you who you voted for or what your sexual orientation.
Sorry to laugh.
No, I'm just going to step in and do what's right first and foremost. Help them out, give them everything I can, and leave those other things to be decided at a later date. Right? And that's what, when I tell people, it's my work has always been my ministry ever since I figured this out. Right? I'm not proselytizing. I'm not shaking the Bible at people and telling them they're doing wrong, but it should give them some confidence that when they come to talk to me, they know how I'm going to treat them. And it's going to be with respect, right? And it's going to be with an intention that it is to grow them and help them become the best at whatever it is they want to be. That's to me, it makes it easy. I don't have to think about me anymore, right? Like EOS, I've got a better plan to follow, right? Instead of my own ways and means.
Well, you have experience with sales leadership as well. And whether it's Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, one of the authors in the sales thought leadership said, and I'll butcher this quote too, but forgive me, that if you help enough people, you don't have to worry about helping yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that applies, that same sort of logic, right? Where it's like when you're focused on helping people and doing the right thing, there's a bit of a, what's the word I'm trying to say? An anti-anxiety consequence to that, because then you focus on the inputs, that which you can control, right? From a philosophical perspective, that could be stoicism, but it also applies to the walk that you're talking about. And I think when people, one of the things I love about EOS, I'll tie it back to EOS, is if you focus on setting the right scorecard metrics and the right rocks and executing upon them while still doing your day job and filling your jar, so to speak, every day, week, quarter, I think one of the hardest things is to not judge the outcome. Like, oh no, sales are down. It's like, okay, well, let's identify, discuss, and solve why that may be. Yep. Okay, yep. What are the leading indicators?
Leading indicator, absolutely.
Like, why is that? Not pointing fingers or stressing out about not getting the outcome you want, because oftentimes what I find is, and I'm saying this to you as a reminder to self, is that by letting the outcome into God's hands, you're probably in better hands than your own.
Well, you brought up a good point, and I had a dinner conversation last night with some good friends of ours, and he works for a large insurance company as an adjuster, and we were talking about some of the dysfunction they have, right? And EOS not only does it provide a great framework, but it gets everybody on the same page. And I will, going back to the business I've worked in and the ones I've consulted with, I will tell you the number one problem with success at companies is a lack of alignment in usually success metrics and KPIs, right? Your department can be crushing it. Usually happens with early stage companies where all they want is growth. We got to have new logos. We got to sell. Well, they basically unleash sales to make any deal they can because they just want new logos, and they never are looking at the impact that's having to the rest of the organization. Right? Somebody's got to eat that elephant once we slay it. Right? And without that alignment, you see failure every single day. Sales is crushing it. They're making bank, right? They're going on president's trips, et cetera. And the rest of the organization is struggling because of there's lack of control at the top end. They are killing it. They're hitting their KPIs, but you have a misalignment across the organization. And without that, I can't tell you how many companies I've given the three-legged stool discussion to, right? It's at least three legs, and every leg has got to be just strong as the other, because if you sit your tuchus down on that and one of them's weak, it's going to break and you're going to fall over, right?
It's interesting that you have that analogy, because your background with having 35 different job titles
Yeah.
right? You've been in each legs of the stool. And I think I understand the analogy. It's the front end, so sales marketing. It's the middle, which is operations, fulfilling the work. And then it's the back end or the back room, which is the finance and accounting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it it's almost like if you are great at operations and sales and marketing, then you will always be limited by your finance and accounting. And
Yep.
it will happen, and it'll be the eternal recurrence of constraints. So, at least in your experience, you've gotten sat in each of the seats, which is an interesting POV because a lot of integrators that I've talked to may have been great at operations,
Yeah.
but maybe have never sold a thing in their life or managed a salesperson directly. And there's nothing, I'm not saying one's better or worse, it's just very different. So, how
Yep.
is that three-legged stool perspective, the trinity of business?
Yeah.
How has that kind of shaped your view as being an integrator?
It's the old, I can't remember if it was a Jack Welch thing or an IBM thing that was, job sharing, walk a mile in another man's shoes, right? So
Mm.
understanding that. So did I set out to do that? No, but just being curious and probably a busybody and nosing myself into things that I didn't belong into and realized that I could do that. Right. I have had the ability to sit in those different seats, and now I have empathy for it, and I can now explain. Right. It's funny. I ran part of the FP&A team. I ran. We did commissions for ultimately 3 entities, and it was the same thing. Whether it was every 2 weeks or every month, these financial analysis smart people grousing about how much money we're paying the salespeople, right? And I was part of that. I'm like, yeah, they're not doing anything. We're not bringing new clients. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I move over to sales marketing, and the first time I have to sit down in front of a client and basically give them a quote for $25 million, right, for a GUI front end on this application, the hardest thing I have ever done. I'm sure I was shaking. I'm sure my voice was warbling, right? And so now I would go back to the commission team. I'm like, hey, you can do it. If you think it's that easy, yeah, we're
Go
paying a
do
lot of
it.
money. Go give it a shot. See how it works out. You cannot
Yeah.
do it, right? And so yeah, the ability to sit now with somebody and explain to them what another department's doing and give them empathy for how hard it is, and God, she can never get my expense report right. Well, she's got 70 of them to do, and they have to be done in a period of time so the books can get closed so we get financial statements, right? So to just walk people through that, and it just, I do believe I've been gifted with sitting in those so that I can explain, so that I can empathize, and I can, if those departments don't get along, and when they do get along though, right, it's awesome. It's that, making, where 1+1 = 5 even, right? Because the output of alignment is a force multiplier.
It's so refreshing to hear this story and this take because oftentimes what I found is in people's personal development journeys, they want the end result, right? They want to have empathy, they want to have patience. But as you've walked and shared, in order to get that, you have to pay the price to
Mm.
obtain empathy and keep paying it, right? Which is walking miles in shoes and seeing it firsthand from their perspective. Or for patients, is to, um, you know, uh, remind yourself that this is the reason, right? Like, I'm sure there's analogies to parenthood, but at least with sales, like, hey, whoever suggested that these people shouldn't get comped, it's like, or the expense reports should be done faster. It's like, okay, well, understanding through understanding and empathy, and is part of being a servant leader, right? Is walking the walk. It's like, no, there's reasons why,
Yeah.
right? So it's like leading with your heart and seeing with your head.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and appreciating, right? You want your accountant to be singular focused, right? You want them to be really good at what they do. It's not something you want to be lackadaisical or loose on. You want them to fight for the penny, right? That drives people nuts, right? Can't you just force it to balance? Yeah, you can, but accountants love finding that penny, right? The theoretical penny, and making it balance. And salespeople love the thrill of chase and the kill, right? It's what motivates them. So yeah, it's finding those motivations and then speaking with people about what it is so they can understand, and they can look across the department, the company, and have respect and understand that without them, the company will not be successful. Without sales, you're not going to do anything. Without being to implement a client, you're not going to do anything. Well, without the ability to account for the money, you're not going to do anything. It's all going to fail, right? It's all going to fall apart.
You just made an interesting point, and I needed to double click, so to speak, on it. You just identified motivators for like sales and accounting roles, right? Counting the penny, hunting for the kill. In your words, what are those motivators for integrators and visionaries? What do visionaries love and what do integrators love?
Yeah. Yeah. So the visionaries that I've known just love the freedom to have the 30 or 40 different ideas or concepts in their head, right? And the integrators love taking that and creating it into processes and procedures and outcomes that the rest of the company that can then, step up to and deliver. Not sure if that's exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's, hey, that's your answer. And I think it's true, right? Is one of them loves the chaos of ideas and one of them loves the organization of ideas.
Yeah.
And if you can't organize chaos, then, you have, I'm going to tie it back to spirituality, then you have just by accident evolution versus like intelligent design or, a creator. And I think, at least from my business experience, it's more of an intelligent design. Like stuff does, if it happens by accident, it doesn't last very long.
Yeah. I worked for a super smart guy. And when he and I were first talking about me joining his team, he's like, it scares people that I've got all these different ideas in my head. And I'm like, that is not scary. That is exciting to me because there's always something more to do, right? If we ever run this idea X to ground, I know you've got 20 more to replace it. So the runway for the company, the opportunity for the people to succeed is fantastic. That's what I love about working with like a true visionary, right? They're not encumbered by process and procedure like I am, right? It's there is no constraint on their ability to think of new things and new ideas. And that to me says fantastic things for the future of the organization.
The scary thing for a visionary is not having tons of ideas, because then what happens when the organization gets off track? Like, we need that creative energy and output of ideas to problem solve and how to get back on track.
Yep.
What happens if there's not a clear vision that people can buy into of where it's going to go? Well, then how do you create followers or a team or morale if you don't have a vision where you're going?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's when I was early into business consulting, I don't know if you ever driven through coming out of Nevada into Utah, Highway 80. There's a stretch of road that's about 127 miles long, and you can see, can't remember the city you're coming out of Nevada. You're basically coming out of the mountains and you see it, and then you see it go back to the mountains 120 miles down the road. And it is just dead straight. And there's no, the Bible talks about don't turn to the left, don't turn to the right, right? There is no doubt in your mind where you're going because the vision is so incredibly clear, right? But take that discussion to business owners. I'm like, let's create that for your company, right? How fast can you get from point A to point B when the vision is that clear and people can follow right along because they know exactly what the end game looks like, right? So to me, vision is everything, and you hit on it.
I actually love that story. I want to share an experience within the last several months that reminds me one-to-one correlation. I have the benefit of working with plenty of EOS implementers and people who have years more experience than I ever will. And through taking assessments and conversating with me, several of them are like, you're a visionary. Like, that's your DNA. That's what you GWC. That's who you are. You're a visionary. And I took that, and you have experience in management consulting, so you know that there is quite a bit of benefit, especially some that might be unbeknownst to entrepreneurs or small business owners, right? Because management consulting has a price tag, and typically large organizations can afford it and smaller ones cannot. And I realized I was at a juncture in my business. This was about 2 years in, and I said to myself, hey, I need to figure out, with these 100 ideas and all these possibilities, what are the 3 to 7 things this year that I need to do to get where I want to go. And as a small business owner with some contractors and some assistants, and I have a full-time employee now after I had the clarity of this event, I signed up to go to Vegas, right? Because your experience with Vegas and driving out there is just so peak for this. And the event was through acquisition.com. And acquisition.com, they're, long story short, if you're not familiar, it's Alex and Layla Hermosi. They have a family office. They sold out of their SaaS company and then their service company licensing business and started a firm. Well, when I was in PE, this person was like the same age as me and 10 times larger. And I'm just like, oh, you're doing what I'm doing, and I can learn from somebody who's 10 times further the same age, and blah, blah, blah. So I followed along, and one of their mission statements, if not their number one mission statement, is to make world-class business education available to everyone. So I went to this conference, and it was 2 days intensive with like 100 other people that were in similar sized business, some larger, some younger, smaller. But like I was one of the smaller businesses, and I got to speak with the people that were in the private equity firm, right? The people that were in charge of the conference. That some were in strategy, some were in growth, some were in marketing, finance, you name it, every function of the business. And you get to ask questions and share. And there was a workbook on how to value a business. And one person in the growth section said something to me, and I shared what my idea was, and I shared 9 others. And he just after the 9th, he goes, "It's okay, stop. What was the first thing you said?" I repeated it, and he goes, "Okay, why don't you just do that 10 times more and forget the 9 other things you're worried about?" And I'm just like, I tried to think of a smart retort, I couldn't. I was like, "Can you explain more?" I just said, "Can you go on?" Yep. And he goes, "Okay, so the reason we're here today is because the strategy that you have is what we did, and we went all in, and we went from 1 to 27 million. And that was the first big milestone of growth, because we stopped trying to do everything, and we did one thing really well." So shout out to Ed Turney from acquisition.com. That was my like aha moment in the last year. And I'm just like, wow, thank goodness I have people that can put the guardrails on my visionary brain and not make me go crazy with all the possibilities.
The success you can have by doing one thing really well versus doing 5 things so is insane, right? The economies of scale, the efficiencies you're going to create in process and procedure, all of that. So if you're looking to get to profitability as fast as possible, doing one thing super well is really your fastest point from A to B, right? So, yeah.
So I just can't help but think that part of what you do is what the benefit that I gained from that conference, right? It's giving the aha moment, putting the, I don't want to say it, it's like when you're going bowling, okay, and your goal is to hit a strike, but instead of the lane being 6-7 feet wide, it's like infinitely wide, and you're just like, no, here's the lane, here's the gutter, this is your target, roll away, and like try and hit a strike. That's what I feel like an integrator does.
Yep, absolutely. That's a good analogy.
So I have a couple questions where, it's been an absolute pleasure. And Frank, I could talk to you for another hour, but I doubt that your calendar nor mine would allow for that, to my chagrin. I'm going to have 2 questions I'm saving for you. Number 1, we talked a bit off camera about the one challenge that if you could solve, and it was a very interesting answer. And you shared that you'd love to solve how to break free from poverty. Can you explain why that would be the one challenge, and how you would help others to do so?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I actually forgot I wrote that in the questionnaire. It's growing up poor is interesting. And I've got all these different theories and analysis and observations about people that the most challenging thing for somebody who's not used to having money is getting money, because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to manage it. And I always joke that in the wrong side of the tracks neighborhood that I lived in Davenport, Iowa, right? Everybody had a big screen TV and a VCR, right? So, and it's true, right? Because you don't spend your money on the right things, but when you get a hold of something, you buy something that is sort of celebratory, right? The number of days that we're racing to the water company or the gas company to make a payment before 5 o'clock so our utilities don't get shut off was like an every month occurrence. But we had a VCR in the 70s, which was like $1,000 back then, right? And so one of the hardest things to break free of poverty is to understand the value of money. And the second thing that everybody asks me the same question. So you're really that poor? I'm like, yeah, it says, well, did you ever take government assistance? And I'll tell you, no, and I'll say no, and I'll say no again. Never did, right? And I think one of the worst things we can do to people is to diminish their pride and their self-worth by making them believe that they can't do it on their own. Now, it's hard, don't get me wrong, and I know there's a lot of people, especially single moms, where it's hard to work and to watch your kids at the same time. And yeah, so it's not a perfect scenario, but solving all of that to have those social programs be a crutch that gets you back on your feet that you can leave at some point, right? And it's, again, I got 5 sisters, and watching them go through the ins and outs of poverty and raising kids and divorce and et cetera, because money problems do not just affect you, it affects every part of your life, right? So just to see broken homes and broken families, and now being somebody that is faithful and cares about other people, my problem is, and my wife and I sometimes have some difficulty with this, I'll give away everything now, right? If I'll give away everything, right? It's okay, you got to stop sending this money to this ministry in Uganda, Frank. You got to stop doing it. Well, I'm like, these people can't. So I've become a little bit of a bleeding heart, but I care for others now, right? So if I could figure out how a pathway was where you would give people the knowledge and the education, the understanding of how to treat money in the first place, then give them the potential to acquire it, and then allow them to apply it while giving them support along the way. But at some point that support ends because they're now on their own and they're walking on their own 2 feet, right? To me, that's an overall solution that I don't think anybody has like the real solution for at this point.
That's so interesting. And there's a couple of things I want to highlight before I ask my next question is number one, some people treat money as if it's it could almost be an addiction, right? Where like the spending of money or the gambling of money or the frivolous pursuit might give you short-term dopamine and long-term pain, right? So it's like walking in faith or like living in sin could be an example, right? From a spiritual bank account. But from a different perspective, it's like they don't understand that you can use your time to then buy back more time or invest your money into, using it as a tool versus using it as an end in and of itself, right? So stopping that dopamine type cycle is difficult to do, but like with any addiction to kick, you have to understand that you have to change your pattern of behaviors and pattern of thought in order to kick it. And the other one you said, I have to highlight and applaud is you're probably not wired to receive any type of assistance or handout from like government, because my assumption is you're wired to serve and not to be served. Right? So like if you were a true servant leader and you're expecting others to serve you without earning or, making or earning, the difference between making money is different than earning money. I just don't think that's part of your DNA. And I think a lot of people, if you haven't lived with and seen poverty, at least firsthand, right? You have the empathy to understand that walk and how you'd want others not to experience it yourself. I think one of the greatest gifts that I ever had was having 3 out of 4 grandparents grow up in extreme poverty, right? I had one grandparent that didn't, right? Like it's cool. I got both perspectives, but 3 out of 4 did. And like you said, I had an aunt. Well, I don't want to say who it was, but there was a time that she went through a divorce and her relationship with money was never, it was as soon as it comes in hand, then it's got to be spent on something to make her feel good. Whether it was the big screen TV for $8,000 back 10 years ago, where that was as much as a car, and then it's like, what do I do for rent, my medication? So I love that. And it's having empathy for those that are in poverty and having courage to serve them and train them and teach them how to not have to repeat the cycle endlessly. Right.
Yeah, I have 28 nieces and nephews, and some of them, and again, I don't want to sound unfair about it at all, but society deals you a hand, and you can choose to accept it or not. And to me, the frustration with even some in my own family is that they just accept what society dealt them, and they just, whether it's too hard or they don't have the motivation or it's too easy just to accept it and to be what society thinks you should be, right? And if some of the greatest leaders in our country, if they'd accepted what society put out for them, we wouldn't have some of the most fantastic things we have, right? So that's sort of this mantra that I have is, heck with society. I don't care where you're born. I don't care what color your skin is. Do not accept what they've deemed or determined you should be, and figure out what God has determined you should be, and then figure out how to deliver that. And you may never get there, but it's so much better than just sitting back and dodging balls that are being thrown at you all the time, and instead of figuring out how to throw them back, right? So, but yeah, that's again probably a little altruistic and a little Pollyanna, but I see people with just too much promise that have accepted that single motherhood is now destined me for this awful life for the rest of my existence. I just don't believe that's true.
The next question is something that I introduced to this podcast recently, and my personal favorite part of the show. It's leave a question, ask a question. So the guest before you, not knowing who you are, not knowing anything about you, has this question for you. And that question is, simply put, what is your superpower?
It's superpower. It's my greatest strength and my greatest weakness. And I've had this discussion so many times. We've talked about the multitude of jobs I have. My superpower is that I'm 4 miles wide and about 2 inches deep. And my greatest weakness is I'm 4 miles wide and 2 inches deep, right? So, but just because I've sat in the different jobs, the different chairs and the different responsibilities, my ability to meet people where they're at in their role in a company is probably my superpower, right? And I only get that from deciding that I'm never going to be really great at one thing, but I'd like to be good if I'm going to be a leader of people. I'd like to be good at a lot of things because I can understand what they do, right? So, and then just my drive to deliver, right? I I don't know if you watch Rugrats, but
Oh, I'm familiar.
so Jessica and her responsibility. So
Responsibilities.
she says, I think Chucky says responsibility.
Yeah.
But I've got a responsibility, right? If there's anything that I know that I've got is that
You're responsible.
yeah, people they're beholden to me, and it's up to me to deliver and repay them for their faith in me by being responsible. So
now, this may be the most difficult question or the easiest question. Without knowing who the next guest will be, what question, Frank, do you have for them?
What mark and what are you doing? What mark are you going to leave on this world in whatever it is you do? So not just the greatest, but what impact are you going to have, and how are you going to have that impact?
Both.
Sort of that last things first perspective of, if you were to die today, what would they say at your funeral, and is it what you want them to say? So if it's not what you want them to say, you better get busy.
Yeah, do some work realigning.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the world's greatest philanthropist, but I don't have any money right now. So
gonna be tough.
Yeah, give my time. So yeah, but there's some planning there, and I wasn't much of a planner growing up, but it really wasn't until that 2004 discussion, I think I told you, where in 10 years I'm going to be a COO. Until I actually said that out loud, I don't think it would have ever happened. So if you're planning on leaving an impact, a legacy on this earth, what is it and what are you doing to get there?
Excellent question. Looking forward to asking it.
That's probably a better way to state it.
Well done.
Much of an impromptu guy.
No worries, Frank. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and everyone listening, it's been a pleasure to share these stories and thoughts with you as well. I do not run ads in the show. I do not plan to run ads in the show. The show exists for you to find valuable nuggets of insight. And if you did, then my only ask is to share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. And I care about the show quite a bit. I care about your growth. And Frank, as always, I will take these lessons and do my best to walk the walk in faith. Thank you for sharing them.
Well, Ross, it's been an honor. I didn't think this would be anything of value. As I told you, I'm like, this is probably going to be the most boring podcast you've ever done. But I'm glad I was had the opportunity to be part of it, and very, very grateful, very thankful for it.
Thank you to all, and to all be well.